Preston are opening up some of their civic buildings during the day, I think, as part of the cost of living stuff. So it's something we need to look at.
Evening, everybody. 6 o'clock. Thanks for attending the meeting of the Governance Committee, Tuesday, 29th of November. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to outline some housekeeping rules. There are no planned fire alarms, so if it does sound, please leave via the emergency exits. Can I request that all mobile phones are kept on silent or switched off? Thank you. Welcome to councillors, officers and external auditors. Members of the committee are attending in person here at the Civic Centre with officers and external auditors. Other members of the council may also dial in to the meeting via Teams, and I think we've got one at the moment, to observe and or participate in the meeting. Please note this meeting is recorded and live streamed on YouTube. The web link for this can be found on the council's website. Members on Teams are asked to keep their microphone on mute and only unmute when they wish to speak. And could I remind members to unmute themselves once they have finished speaking, only once they've finished speaking, to enable the meeting to proceed smoothly. Okay, so item 1, apologies.
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Margaret Smith and we have Councillor Karen Walton in substitution tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. Item 2, declarations of interest. This item has been put as agenda item. What's that all about? 3. However, we'll take this before the minutes. If a committee member has a pecuniary interest, they are requested to leave the meeting completely. The member can rejoin the meeting following the completion of the item in question. Does anybody have any interest to declare? No. Excellent. So we can go on to item 3, minutes of the last meeting. So I've got the minutes of the last meeting in front of me for approval. Are there any points of accuracy on the minutes? Councillor Ogilvie.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm not expecting an answer tonight, but I'm looking at page 5. And third paragraph down starts members ask for clarification on threats. From there to the end of that section, minute 23, there are 5 points where we were promised some additional information. I'm not aware that we've received any of that information. So if you can chase that up, please, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Ogilvie. Apologies for that. As you know, the relevant director isn't with the authority anymore, but I'll make sure that those responses are provided.
Thanks very much for that. So, given that point, any other points on the minutes? Can we propose that those can be signed for approval?
I'll propose that, Chair.
Second that. Thank you, Councillor Ogilvie. Okay, so I can sign those off for approval.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our audit findings report, which sets out the findings from our audit of the Council's 21-22 financial statements. If we start on agenda page 9, that sets out kind of the key headlines in terms of the audit. So at the time of writing, there was a number of outstanding areas. Now, some of those areas are still outstanding, some have been closed off. So the NNDR appeals provision, the council tax reliefs, and the receipt of the pension assurance letter from the pension fund auditor, all of that has been completed. Although there are some other outstanding areas, they are substantially underway. So there is some work to do on them, but there is quite a bit of work that has been done so far on those areas. So the remainder of the testing and some of the kind of work around obviously land and buildings and investment properties. So we are substantially through the audit. We do have some work to complete, and we anticipate that that work will be completed in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So just taking you through the findings as they stand at the moment, the following page just sets out the VFM work. So members may recall that under current NAO guidance, we have 3 months after the signing of the opinion on the financial statements to complete that. That work is also well underway. So we anticipate issuing that report by the end of February, but likely to be sooner, and we'll bring that to the next committee. We've not had to use any statutory powers, and there are no significant matters arising during the audit. So just really then to take you to page 12 of the agenda. So that's our materiality. So that's for your information, so you know the levels that we are working to in terms of potential errors in the financial statements and reporting to yourselves as those charged with governance. That has increased since the materiality levels that were set out in the audit plan, and that's because it is based on the gross expenditure of the council. The audit plan was based on last year's financial statements, and then we update that when we received the draft financial statements for this year. Expenditure had increased, so we updated our materiality accordingly. Then the next few pages go through the significant risks we identified, so members will recall these from the audit plan. So that sets out again the significant risks here and the work that we've undertaken to address those risks and the results of that work. So on page 13, management override of controls, you recall that is a mandatory risk under the auditing standards. So we've actually now completed our work in that area. So it says it's kind of substantially complete. It is now complete, and we have no significant issues to report back to you in that area. Following page, again, another mandated risk in terms of revenue recognition. However, we are able to rebut that risk, which we have done. Even though we have rebutted that risk, that doesn't mean to say we don't do any testing on revenue. We still do our usual testing on revenue and also expenditure. The work is still ongoing, but at this point, we have no significant issues to report to the committee. Following page, valuation of the pension fund net liability. So we did identify a couple of issues here. So we just set out those issues in terms of kind of the figures that were originally in the accounts for some of the pension fund assets and liabilities, and some of the kind of figures around the kind of leisure company. So those figures have now been amended. We're satisfied they're being amended, and we're satisfied that they are now correct in the financial statements. Following page around land and buildings and investment properties. Again, we are just finishing our work in that area. There is a lot of work has already been done. And again, we have no significant matters to report to at this time. So just for members' information, I'm sure you'll recall from previous years, obviously we brought our findings report. I will carry on going through in a minute, but just to clarify, where items are kind of still outstanding, we'll finish the work. If there was anything material, we would bring that back to yourselves for approval. But if it's just minor things, we'll just make sure you have an updated audit findings report circulated before we kind of sign off as well. Then on page 17, we've got the group audit. So in terms of that, we've received group accounts. We haven't identified any issues in terms of kind of the actual consolidation of those accounts. We are still doing our testing of the transactions that underlie it. So again, our work is ongoing in that area, but nothing significant to report to you at this time. The next couple of pages just go into the key judgments and estimates in a bit more detail. So you'll know that kind of land and buildings and investment properties, and also the pension liability. They are both based on significant underlying assumptions. So the council does employ experts in both of those areas, a valuer and an actuary. However, as auditors, we do need to look at the assumptions those experts have used and assessed them for reasonableness. So we've just kind of set out there the work that we have done. So again, I think on the land and building investment properties, we're just doing some final checks around kind of yield and some of those assumptions. But again, nothing significant to report at this time. And in terms of the pension liability, as I said, we have now received the assurance from the pension fund auditor. So that work is complete and we are satisfied with the underlying assumptions that support the figures in the accounts. Following page, the provision for NDR appeals. Again, that work is now complete and we've nothing to report back to you in that area. And then the grants income, we are just finishing that off. We have done quite a lot of testing in terms of, you'll recall that in terms of COVID grants, some of them are under the agent print. So the council, where it's an agent, it doesn't kind of put them through their accounts, but where they're a principal, they do need to go through the accounts. So we've checked the accounting for both of those types of grants and we're just doing some final testing now on the actual kind of grants received. One page just sets out some other matters that we kind of cover in the audit and that we report back to you around kind of fraud and related parties, and on the next page, the accounting practices. Again, nothing kind of significant to report to you there. Page 24, going concern. So again, although kind of the accounts would always be prepared on a going concern basis in the public sector, because the key thing is that services would continue if anything kind of did happen in terms of kind of that going concern assumption. But we do work just to make sure there's no material uncertainty that needs to be disclosed, and we're happy that there isn't any uncertainty that does need disclosure, and we're happy with the disclosures in the accounts. We set on page some other information. So we look at the annual governance statement, the narrative report, make sure that they're consistent with our knowledge and consistent with the financial statements. And we've got nothing to report on those areas. In terms of the following page, whole of government accounts, we're waiting for the instructions to be issued around that. So we can't complete that work as yet, but the council is usually under the threshold for the work to be carried out. We expect that to be the case this year as well. So value for money I mentioned earlier, that is still ongoing. On page 28, we'll just remind you of the risk that we identified that was in our audit plan. The work is substantially complete and we will report back to you in our auditor's annual report. We reconfirm our independence on page 9, as we're obliged to do annually. And then the appendices just set out kind of a couple of different areas in terms of what I've already talked through and any recommendations. So Appendix A just has a recommendation about kind of cash to bank reconciliation. So it's done for the main account, but there is some other accounts where that kind of process just needs tightening up, and management have agreed to that recommendation. We follow up the previous year's recommendation. So you see that cash one again. So that's just kind of, it's partially complete because the main rec is done, but you just need to kind of put the others into place now. Then we have the audit adjustments in Appendix C, so page 34. So those are the adjustments in terms of the pension issues that I mentioned earlier. And then the following page just has some kind of misclassification and disclosure issues that have been amended in the accounts. And then finally on page 36, there is one prior year unadjusted error, which was reported last year. And we just really report that to you for completeness so that you can see if there was anything unadjusted this year, the cumulative effect, but actually there isn't any unadjusted errors this year at this point. So I'm happy to take any questions on that report, Chair.
Thank you very much, Georgia. So any questions or comments? Councillor Brotherton, then Councillor Ogilvie.
Yeah, thank you for that report. You mentioned on the investment properties, you look at the assumptions on yields. What is that yield?
So yields vary for individual investment properties depending on the type of property and the kind of potential rental income and things like that. So they vary, and that forms part of the valuation of that property. So it's quite a range, and we just need to make sure that that is kind of appropriately based. So we consult with our internal experts on that. So that's what the process we're going through at the moment, just to make sure that those yields are reasonable and in line with our expectations for the particular type of property or the particular type of valuation.
Have you got an average? What the yield?
Not off the top of my head, sorry, there's quite a range. I mean, we could probably bring something back unless, I don't know.
No, it's fine. I'm just curious. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thanks for the report. Just a few points of quick clarification. Page 21, you mentioned this issue about the council acting as an agent rather than the principal. Is that Is that a decision that they can make for themselves, a choice, or is that dictated that it has to be that way?
So it's dictated by the conditions of the grant. So as a very general rule, if the council has no kind of discretion over the grant, if the government basically said, here's the grant, it's got to be paid to these people, and it's got, so for example, the business rates during COVID, business got a certain amount if they met the qualifications. So the council had no real kind of say or judgment over that. So they're an agent, and then principles where you get the grant and the council does have some discretion or some judgment in the awarding of the grant. So it depends on the conditions of the grant really and the terms of that.
Okay, thank you. And on page 32, yeah, there's mention there of there wasn't a reconciliation done of other bank accounts rather than the main bank account. Have you got some idea to quantify the size of those other bank accounts relative to the main bank account? You know, is it 0.5% or is it 25%, which is quite significant?
Again, off the top of my head, I couldn't do that calculation, but obviously the main bank account is the account that most of the kind of the transactions and the key kind of areas go through. I could come back to you and let the committee know on that. I can kind of go away and look at the file and just clarify that for you and come back. But just to kind of give you some reassurance around that, in terms of the audit work, we do look at obviously the whole cash balance and all the kind of accounts that kind of feed into that cash balance. We get third party confirmations and we look at any kind of key reconciling items ourselves. So we're satisfied that there's nothing with not doing kind of those smaller reconciliations. It doesn't affect kind of the cash figure that's reported in the accounts. We're satisfied that is kind of materially correct or correct. It's just that it's a control issue, really. So those things should be done. But I can certainly come back to the committee if you want a quantification.
Don't spend a lot of time on it. I'm just, as I say, I'm just trying to get a feel for, is it tiny, or is it of any significance at all? I think from what you've said, it's of no significance. So forget it. Finally, on page 33, it was just one of the actions from last year. There was some work to be done on the cash to bank reconciliation, which hadn't been done. I just wondered if you'd received a satisfactory explanation from the council as to why that hadn't happened.
So the council is working through that. So they have started the process and they are kind of on with kind of doing that. So we're satisfied that kind of the recommendation is in progress. It's just not got to kind of the end point yet. So that's why it's kind of carried over to this year. It's the same recommendation really, except now the main account is done and the processes are starting to be put into place, but it's just not kind of that kind of, it's not kind of finished yet and it's not happening on that kind of regular basis that we would expect. So I'm satisfied the council is addressing it. It's just not quite there yet.
Have you been given an ETA for it?
Yeah, I think the report says the 31st of December. So it's kind of the page before. So it's the same recommendation carried over. So it was partially complete. So we've carried it over and management said they will do it as quickly as possible and by the 31st of December to have all those processes in place.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for your work so far. If I can just wind back to one of Alan's questions a moment ago. You said that you'd done the transactional level working on the overall main bank account and other bank accounts, but it was a control issue. It is possible, although unlikely, that substantial amounts could go through a minority account, depending on circumstances. Are you saying that such a large amount has not done so, but that the controls still will need to be looked at?
So what we do as part of the audit, we verify the cash balance in the council's accounts. And we do that by making sure that all of the accounts that the council have been kind of brought together and accounted for correctly. So we may not look at kind of individual transactions going through account. What we look at the year-end balance and make sure that is correct in the council's accounts. So that's what we've done. So we're satisfied that the cash the council says it has is the cash it has, sort of thing, if that makes sense. But what you would expect to see on any kind of bank account is a monthly reconciliation. So you kind of, obviously, at the end of the month, this is what kind of the ledger says, but actually what has gone through the bank, which is not shown in the ledger, or what's gone through the ledger, which isn't quite gone through the bank yet. So that's the reconciliation that they need to do. And if those aren't done, it doesn't necessarily mean that big transactions are missed, but the council needs to know where its cash balance is sat and where it's correct at each month, sort of thing. So that's why they need to do those monthly reconciliations. But the audit work is more about, is the cash balance in the council's accounts at the 31st of March correct and complete? And that's the work we've done.
But if I got that right, that routine reconciliation just isn't being done.
For some of the minor accounts, it is for the main account where most of the council's transactions will go through and be shown. But obviously, kind of historically, councils have like other smaller accounts sometimes, and that they're the ones. So the risk is likely to be a lot lower because they're not the main account. However, as a control, those monthly reconciliations should be done as routine.
Is it okay? Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Brotherton, another question.
Sorry, just to follow on from Councillor Shaw's comments, what kind of transactions will go through those minor accounts? For what purpose?
You've got more detail, Steve.
The main payments account, which is subject to the monthly reconciliation, that covers the vast majority of the council's activity. I'm just trying to think of sort of some minor sources of income might go through separate accounts, but the main payments account is subject to a monthly reconciliation. I can come back with more specific examples if you wish.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say with the questions, if we come back and we'll give the details of those accounts, what's gone through them, and the size of the balances, if that would give assurances to members what we're looking at there.
Yes, that'd be. We had some reassurance that it's income coming in. A bit more concerned if it was money going out. But yeah, please give us some more information. Thank you.
Sorry. I don't know if it's relevant. I was sort of thinking when we pay for the mayor's ball and things like that, that would be a small account, but would be separate to the, would it be something like that? Fundraising type?
It could be potentially, but, you know, as auditors, we don't especially we might not necessarily look at every single transaction going through every single account. What we're concerned is that end balance is correctly stated. So that's why I can't answer you straight away, but potentially, you know, as kind of Steve said, and as you say, they're usually kind of small accounts that have been set up for a specific purpose, aren't used very much. You know, it's the key one is that kind of main payments and receipts account that, you know, you really need to kind of have the really kind of tough controls in place, but then the others are routine controls that should really be in place.
Okay, thanks very much. Any other questions from members on the committee? Members not on the committee? No, well, thank you very much. The items for noting, so thanks for your work, Georgia, and we'll see you again soon. Takes us on to item 5, Statement of Accounts 2021-2022, and Louise is going to present this item.
Thank you, Chair. So the paper covers the audited statement of accounts. As Georgia has just outlined, there's still some work yet to be done, but all of the adjustments identified have been processed through those accounts and adjusted, and they are presented here tonight for your approval. However, given that the work is not complete, and it may well be that there are further adjustments that come out of the work of the auditors, if those are immaterial and don't have any significant impact on the accounts, then delegated authority is sought to myself in consultation with the chair to make those adjustments to the accounts. However, if the amendment that has been identified is significant and material and impacts on the financial position of the council, then obviously we would need to reconvene a governance committee to approve the updated statement of accounts. And also the report contains at Appendix B a draft letter of representation, which is a letter that is requested by the auditors to be signed by the chair of the governance committee and myself as director of finance, outlining all of the information that we have made available to give representation to the fact that we have made available to the auditor all information for any questions that they have asked, any evidences that they have sought, we have readily provided. That we've sought information from our advisors where appropriate, and that we have basically disclosed all information to them that we know about at this point in time that has impact on the accounts, and that's our statement of representation. So it's presented here tonight again to ask for approval from the committee for the chair of governance and myself to sign that, and if there's anything in there that is inconsistent with anything that you have come across over the course of the year, and that you want to highlight. In relation to the statement of accounts themselves, obviously we've just had a session to go through those in detail. The statement of accounts were produced in draft. The deadline was the 31st of July that was set. We missed that deadline just by a couple of days, but kept the auditor informed of that throughout. That was just a resourcing issue within the team, but those were presented and they were also published on the council's website. Since that date, the audit has been conducted. I think the audit started at the beginning of August, and we're now at the end of November, and we're still going through that process. And the deadline set by government for production and publication of audited accounts is the 30th of November. I think I would be right in saying that I don't expect more than half of authorities to be able to meet that deadline. And I know from talking to other authorities, some have not even produced their accounts yet. So we're on track to just to get there, albeit a couple of weeks late. But we do expect to be able to publish those audited accounts by Christmas. That's the deadline that we're working to. And the report just goes on to identify the items that have been recommended for adjustment into the accounts, which we have put through accordingly. And those are the accounts that you have in front of yourselves now. But I'm happy to take any further questions that you may have subsequent to the session that we had to go through.
Thanks, Louise, and thanks for delivering that session previously as well. It was really helpful. So any questions? Councillor Ogilvie.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, can I echo thanks for that briefing? It was very useful, and some simple explanations were given, which were gratefully received.
Thank you.
First query I've got is page 89, where the statements that are going to be, this is my understanding that this will appear on the council's website as of tomorrow, effectively, where it's set under the independent auditor's report. This page is intentionally blank and will be filled with the independent auditor's report on conclusion of the audit. I just feel that if a member of the public looks at that, it just looks like a big hole in the statement. I just feel there should be a bit of explanation. I think from what you've said elsewhere in the report that basically you're comfortable with the fact that the auditor hasn't finished his work yet, and that anything that perhaps might have come out of what was still to do would not be material and so wouldn't affect it. I think it would just be useful to have some bit more explanation on that page for members of the public who might look at that report. So that's point one. Looking at some of the numbers that you went through previously, Page 95. Page 95. Ah, yes, it is. Cost of services. Cost of service net. The net expenditure last year was 11.8 million. This year it's 21.7 million, which is nearly double to provide cost of services. Is that something we should be concerned about? And the final question I've got is that relates back to the first point I made there. The letter of representation. Is the chair comfortable? Is our legal person, is Chris comfortable that that letter can be signed off without the auditor's report having been completed and part of the financial statements? Thanks.
Yeah, to answer the first question and the movement, I don't have that detail to hand now, but again, I'm happy to provide to the committee some analysis of the main points between that net expenditure in the year 2021 of 11.855 and the figure in 21-22, which is 21.77 million.
Yeah,
That's okay.
The numbers are in the report there, so it's not that the numbers are missing. It's just
No.
to me the fact that it's double what it was last year.
Yeah.
Is that, is there some fundamental reason for that? Because cost of services you would like to think would be held or in fact reduced rather than doubled.
Yeah, and a significant proportion of that is in the commercial and property directorate, and if I can come back to you on that with a more detailed analysis of that, that would be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, and as to the second part of your question as to whether I'm comfortable, yes, on the basis that it will only be signed if the director of finance is satisfied that it is correct. So yes.
Thank goodness for them.
The other point was just whether you agree with me that perhaps a bit more explanation about the missing audit report in the statement of accounts is worthwhile considering.
I think, I'm always happy to provide more explanation for something like that. I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea. I'm not one for saying this is the way we've always done it, therefore we should continue to do it, but that has been the practice in previous years. But I think I can't see any reason why it wouldn't be helpful to provide a bit more information explaining that we're not quite finished yet and this is the current state of play effect.
Georgie, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, so the target date for publishing audited accounts is 30th November, which, as you say, is tomorrow. However, the audit isn't finished. So rather than the accounts being published on the website, what will need to happen is the council just need to put a notice up to say the audit is still continuing and why. And then once it's complete, then the audited account should go on with our opinion. So that should be the process.
Right, thank you for that, because I was assuming that they would appear on the website tomorrow, but from what you're saying, they won't appear on the website tomorrow.
Oh, sorry, that was.
That answers
I thought you were referring to these papers that are obviously been published and whether we could add anything to these papers. So I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks for that clarity all round. Any other questions? Councillor Brotherton?
Yeah, thank you. It's just relating back to the local government pension scheme that we asked a question and in the training session. Just to confirm, the figures here is South Ribblesborough Council's pension fund, which is a share of the larger Lancashire pot. What percentage of this is it to the main pot?
And I honestly couldn't answer that question without going back to the pension fund to ask them for that level of detail.
No problem. But this is South Ribbles.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So within the accounts, there are two figures that are related to pensions. So at note 37, there is a lot more information about the pension fund, South Ribble Borough Council pension fund. And then as you move further into the report, there's a section on the group accounts, and that there is a pension note on there which represents the consolidated position. So it's South Ribble Borough Council's pension and also the pension net liability that relates to South Ribble Leisure Limited as at the 31st of March. Yep.
Thank you.
But both of those are independent schemes that are part of the overall Lancashire Pension Fund, and Lancashire Pension Fund has all of the Lancashire authorities. It's got schools, academies, housing associations. There's a whole range of bodies that are within that.
Are they invested differently, or are they invested exactly the same? That's what I was getting at. This is a percentage of the.
Yeah,
They're all invested the same way.
Yes, they tend to invest all of them the same. Are pooled but managed individually and accounted for individually.
So no one individual scheme is taking extra risk. They're all the same, same risk.
And the pension board will meet regularly, and they will determine their appetite for risk. But obviously, it is pensions, it's people's livelihoods and government money that's going into it. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Councillor Walton.
Thank you. And thank you, Louise, for that briefing before. It was very informative. I just have a couple of questions. One on page 78, it's about the risk register. And I noticed that the risk for our 06 staff of capacity and skills has gone up from last time. And I just wondered what the impact of this would have on the delivery of service and the capital projects. I know there are some things that have been put in place, but I'm just quite worried that we will be able to deliver what we've in the capital programme and services. And then on page 125, it's about the business rates pooling arrangements. I just wondered if we'd got any information about next year, and do you think it's going to carry on for next year?
Thank you, Chair. So in relation to the risk register, so the risk register that is included in the narrative was the final one that was produced for the Q4 for the year 21-22, and that was the update that was presented to the council at the time. Obviously, that risk has continued. It continues to be on the risk register, and that has been managed now through another 2 quarters, the quarter to the 30th of June and then the quarter to the 30th of September, and we'll be in the process of doing a review again. So the position has moved on significantly since we were there, and the I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what the rating is on it now, and how the actions have progressed to mitigate that risk. That will be in that report. And in relation to the second question on the Lancashire business rates pool, we were told by government that there would be a complete change in business rates and the business rates mechanism for 23-24. That hasn't happened. So we were in September, government approached all existing pools, including the Lancashire pool, and asked if they wished, if there was the option available, would they wish to continue? So Ribble Valley, who is the lead manager on the pool, contacted all the members, including South Ribble, and we expressed our wish to continue it if it was available, because it is a very good scheme. We've submitted the expression of interest and we are awaiting the outcome. But I think given that they've sought expressions of interest, I would be thinking it's highly likely that they are thinking of repeating it. And we should find out when the provisional settlement is issued. And we are expecting that about the 21st, 22nd, 23rd of December.
Thanks very much for that. Any other questions, members on the committee, members not on the committee? Okay, that's great. So a vote is required for this. Do I need to read all these points out in detail?
You don't have to if all members are happy just to refer to the relevant page.
Okay, I can read the full detailed recommendations out if you'd like, or I can refer to them on the papers and we can vote on those. So do we have a proposer?
Yeah, of course.
And a seconder? Thanks, Councillor Ogilvie. All right. No.
Yeah, so sorry, just to be clear, members, the recommendations are paragraphs 2 to 5 in the body of the report. Yeah.
Okay, so all those in favour? That's unanimous. Thanks very much, and thanks Louise, thanks for your work with that. So it takes us on to item 6, Treasury Management, a mid-year review 22-23, and it's Louise again. Page 205, I think, on this one. You're going to defer to Steve. Steve, over to you.
Louise, thank you, Chair. Okay, so this is one of the 3 Treasury Management reports that we have to bring to the committee each year. At the start of the year, we have the budget report. At the end of the year, we have the outturn report. And this is actually the mid-year report. So it's showing for 22-23 what the council's investment position was as at the 30th of September. Ordinarily, a mid-year report would also outline the debt or borrowing position, but obviously that doesn't apply to South Ribble with its balance sheet. Whilst the report does set out some planned capital expenditure for the year, the expectation is that that'll be covered within the council's own cash resources. So in terms of Treasury activity, I mean, for the last 2 years, things have been very skewed by significant amounts of COVID funding that have been passing through every council's accounts. That has largely washed through now. I think the last element that we saw was the £150 energy support payments that were processed earlier in the year. Also, previous years we've endured exceptionally low interest rates, and they're now increasing, which is good in terms of investment activity, but obviously brings with it additional costs as well. So in terms of the investment, which is the focus for South Ribble, our approach is always security, liquidity, yield, in that order. Security, because it's public money, we want it to be in a safe place. Liquidity, we want to be able to get at it when we need it. And then finally, yield. You know, whilst that's important, it should never come at the expense of the first 2. So the report sets out that we had an average daily balance for the first 6 months of 54.6 million. That compares to 58 million last year. So the reduction is due to that COVID money having flowed through the accounts. The yield on those balances for the first 6 months, we got 0.79%. Now that compares to 0.15 the previous year, so up quite significantly. And in cash terms, we've returned 216,000 in 6 months, whereas last year, for the whole year, we only returned 87,000. So again, those interest rates are helping on the investment side. Like I say, it's a report that we have to do under the Code of Practice, and in terms of recommendations, we are just asking that you note the report. But just to reiterate, we've remained within our prudential indicators. We've adhered to our counterparty limits. We've not entered into any borrowing, and we've achieved that investment yield of 0.79%. So I'll take any questions and otherwise ask members to note the report.
Thanks very much, Steve, and should have introduced you really. So in case colleagues don't know, it's Steve Kenyon and Deputy Director of Finance. Interim Deputy Director of Finance. So thanks for that, Steve. Questions for Steve at all? Alan?
One very quick one, and it's on the last topic you were speaking about there, the percentage return. The 0.79, it says this compares with the benchmark of 1.22%, and then it goes on to say that because of the timing of the investments that were behind potentially behind where we could have been. So does that benchmark figure not relate to the same 6-month period that the 0.79% relates to? Because if it doesn't, then it's not a fair comparison.
I suspect that benchmark was collated at a later point in time, at which point the trajectory of rates was upwards. But we are expecting that we will achieve a higher yield in the second half of the year.
Yeah, the point I'm trying to make is I think it makes the report look a bit worse than it actually is.
Okay. Any other questions for Steve? Nope. Questions from people not on the committee? No. Well, thanks very much for that, Steve. The item's just for noting. And that takes us on to item 7, Constitution Planning Committee. There's a supplementary paper that came out as well with this, and Chris is going to present this item.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd invite the committee to consider items 7 and 7A as a single report, and do apologise it's been presented in that form, but I was conscious that the recommendation in the initial report might have been a little bit misleading, because it kind of suggested that it perhaps should be considered tonight, with recommendations going to full council, and that's not the practice. But members will recall that there was a notice of motion presented to full council, and the text of that is contained in the body of the first report, proposing effectively 2 changes to the constitution. One is a restriction preventing the executive member with responsibility for planning from sitting on planning committee, and the other change is to amend the rights of members to call planning, effectively call planning applications in to be heard by the committee as a group, rather than under delegated powers. So I've set out in the 2 reports some of the factors that members may want to consider. We don't have all that information for members, and in fact there might be things that members want to consider that I haven't put in the reports. So the proposal is to convene the Constitution Working Group, which does follow the usual practice at the authority, with a view to considering, to scoping out the issues relating to this notice of motion, and getting further information and evidence, and then making an informed and considered decision on the notice. Members will also recall, though, that there are a number of other recommendations that came out of the Office for Governance and Public Scrutiny report that also made suggestions to amend the Constitution, and I'd propose, whilst not part of this report, that the working group would receive some of those recommendations and perhaps do a wider piece of work on the Constitution as well. So that's the report, Chair.
Thanks, Chris. Councillor Shaw.
As somebody who was asked to second the original motion at council, I would have to say what Chris is saying. It makes perfect sense to me that we should sit down and have a real good think about it. My view of the original question was always that we should sit down and talk about it and work out what would be the best thing for the future, either of this council or successor council following May. So I'd be quite happy to go along with the proposed sending it to the Constitution Working Group.
Thanks, Councillor Shaw. Anybody else with any comments? Councillor Ogilvie.
Yes, I'd agree with that. It makes perfect sense for it to go to a task group. Certainly, I haven't been on planning since 2008, I think. So a lot of the issues that current planning committee members might have are unknown to me. So it would be a nonsense, I think, for this particular body just to discuss it on its own. So yes, I would go with that recommendation.
Thanks very much for that. Councillor Walton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I, having served on the Constitutional Working Group for quite a number of years and knowing how hard people work to make sure that the Constitution works for this council, I'm thoroughly in agreement with this is the best way forward.
Thanks very much for that. It sounds like there's an agreement. Any comments, questions from anybody? Anybody else on the committee? Anybody not on the committee? So I can see just about in the distance there that Councillor Tomlinson's hands up electronically and Councillor Martin. So Councillor Tomlinson first, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Good evening. Good evening, committee members. When you look at councils up and down the country, portfolio holders, even leaders of the council, sit on planning. And I can't actually figure why this has been brought as a notice of motion, because the portfolio holder called in a planning application that was done for delegated decision. But yeah, if you want to set up a task force and discuss this, I actually think if you're going to take away the best tools the council has on any committee, is a big, big mistake. All right, thanks for your time, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Tomlinson. Thank you very much. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Our committee. I'm happy with the recommendation for it to go to a working group, and if you're short of any members, I'm happy to sort of help out if that's the case, as we do with all working groups. Just a few points is that no rules have been broken to get to where we are, to this position at the moment, and I sort of personally feel that this will perhaps inhibit, because parts of the role of a ward councillor or a councillor of South Ribble, when I first got elected in 11 and a half years ago, the first thing was told to me, said, you might be a ward councillor, but you also represent the interests of people in South Ribble. And if you cannot comment on a planning application outside of your wards, then you can't fulfil that sort of part of the duty. There is protection for people. Couldn't just call in stuff because they wanted to, because as the Constitution says, any request must be accompanied by appropriate planning reasons, and obviously the chair and the director have to agree that for it to come in. I also think that you could end up with a gated ward where you couldn't, for instance, if ward boundaries change, you could end up with a ward that no one could comment on, say, from another group, which could inhibit democracy there. And I also sort of feel this could inhibit the roles of, say, the leader or a lead member for climate change, perhaps commenting on another application, because there are other mechanisms as well I can do that. I mean, I've commented on a few planning applications outside of my ward with the climate involved. So I'm happy that it's going to a working group, and I would support that working group and its outcomes. And if you need my skills, I'm happy to sit on it, even though I'm not part of this. Cheers.
Thanks for those comments and for that generous offer, Councillor Martin. We'll get back to you. So, Councillor Ogley?
Very quickly, I mean, I suppose it sort of begs the question, how are we actually going to form this working group?
It is a good question, yeah, and it's one that I'll be asking Chris. Do you want to comment now or not?
Yeah, I think the last time we ran the working group, it was pretty much the full membership of the governance committee, because it was quite a comprehensive review we did. I think it should be drawn from the governance committee, because that has been delegated to support me in maintaining the constitution. So I think if members were interested in, I'm quite happy for it to be the full membership again, or whoever is interested in attending. Now, as to support from members off the committee, that is for the working group to really fix, and it might be that you do want to invite the chair of planning, perhaps in this particular instance would be somebody you might want to speak to. And you've heard Councillor Martin indicate, he's got a view on it. You might want to invite other councillors to attend just to give their views on it as well, because it is something that impacts on, I won't say the ability of councillors to represent, because I don't think it quite goes that far, but it does take away a right that councillors currently have or could do if it was implemented, or limit it in a little way. So what I'd suggest, Chair, is that we perhaps ask members of the committee whether they're interested in sitting on the working group. And I'm conscious that Councillor Smith isn't here tonight, so we might need to wait until Councillor Smith returns to allow her the ability to sit, because she has spoken to me about other changes that she wants to be a party to. And then perhaps we can form the working group early in the new year.
Yeah, that sounds like a sensible suggestion if everybody's in agreement with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, are we all okay with that? Right, well, with that brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you very much. Stay safe, enjoy the game, whatever else you're going to be doing this evening. Thanks very much. Thank you.